Welcome to the Fly Culture Podcast, bringing you interviews, reviews and fishing tips. Here's your host, Pete Tigus.
Don't know if you're like me, but if you pass over a bridge, you have to pull over at times and have a look down. I'm in chalkstream country at the moment, and I'm looking down on the River Wylye. In front of me, there's plenty of ranunculus everywhere, and I can see a small, wild brown trout just sitting in between the flow, picking off the odd nymph, looking as though he's having a good day. I've travelled up early this morning from Devon to meet with Roger Fagan, who's chairman of the Wilton Fly Fishing Club. It's a club that's a little bit different, and I plan to learn a whole lot more about it today. Roger, it's great to have you along on the Fly Culture Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Pete. How about yourself?
Fantastic. And we're sitting in a wonderful spot overlooking the river. I'm always early. So I was standing on the various bridges along the river here looking at fish. I just spotted a nice grayling that came out from under one of the bridges that looks fantastic. And everything is very, very good. For our listeners, can you tell us where we are today?
Yes, you're on the River Wylye. You're at Kingsmead. This is Reach 1. The Wilton Club have 7 miles, just over 7 miles of chalk stream here, and it's divided into 24 reaches. And you're at Reach 1 at Kingsmead Bridge, which is idyllic, picturesque chalk stream country.
And we're sitting in a hut, we're sitting in some comfy chairs. We are living the fishing dream right now. How's the season been? Because I've been sitting watching, there's fish rising, and I haven't popped my hand in the water, but I saw there's a gentleman fishing a little bit further up, and it looks as though he's caught a fish or two. But how's the season been for you?
The season for all the members in the club has been sensational this year. At the moment, we're holding our breath thinking we could have a record season. I noticed the stats on Saturday morning. So far this season, we're approaching 3,000 fish in total. And of that, about 20%, maybe a little over 20%, are between 11 and 19 and a half inches.
That's some pretty nice fish there. And it's for our listeners to sort of understand a little bit that I think it's easy to assume when you think of chalk streams, you think of a manicured bank all the way up to the water's edge. And then, unfortunately, one of the words that comes along with chalk streams are stocked fish as well. And you mentioned 19 inches there, and that's a wonderful fish. And the fascinating thing for me is that no stocking goes on here. And the banks are pretty wild, and the anglers actually wade in there. And even I know the fishing here relatively well, and I can see under your presidency how the trees there's plenty of shade, but it's managed. And one of the things I always remember when you first started as president stroke chairman of the club was that the fish come first and the habitat for the fish come first. And I can see very, very clear signs of that already. You must be really pleased with how that's played out. And like you say, the numbers of fish that are being caught, because I know there are good populations of fish in this river, but you must be really pleased with how it's played out so far.
Yeah, I mean, this is a team effort. It's not done because I'm the president. We've got a first-class riverkeeper who arrived at the club with 30 years of experience, and that ranged from salmon rivers in Scotland and in offshore islands and sea trout, and he'd also had some experience in Canada. So this man arrived with a wealth of experience, and not only just experience, but he arrived with university qualifications that he'd got in river management and fishery management. And so he brought a lot of that to bear, and we were both singing, and so was a couple of other people in the club from the same hymn sheet. The fishing has always been good, but wild fishing is a form of masochism, as you know, rather than optimism over, good luck and chance. But there you go.
And do you find that, with the background and the setting of the river, that the members of the club bought into what you were trying to do as well, and make it a great habitat for the fish, and as a result, the population's done incredibly well? But did that go down with, did the, I suspect I know the answer to this, but did that also go down really well with the club members?
Well, Pete, as you know, you were a member here yourself some years ago, and you enjoyed some spectacular fishing. And what's happened with fly fishing is we've had to break a little bit the mold. The demographic is that we're not getting the colonels and retired MPs and captains of industry, and we still have them. But the demographic is that fly fishing is a difficult sport to get into. So trying to manage a fishing club is you're managing everybody's expectations, and the gamut of expectations. It's I have a little image in my head. I sometimes see myself as a man stood in the middle of a seesaw trying to keep it balanced in the middle. Yes, you've had one or two people who want easier access on the banking and the trees cutting back because they interfere with the cast. But by the same token, it means that the members have to learn a new skill set, such as roll casting. And you know, this river's about stealth, and you have to be stealthy and you have to consider presentation, because wild fish are not going to hang around while you thrash around in the water and wave your arms about. And so you have to learn how to side cast and put a fly under a bridge, under a tree. And, you know, some members didn't like that. And some members, you know, they want more areas for the grayling rather than the trout. So it's a juggling thing all the time. The members have all bought in. And what I would say is the younger members are more than happy with a slightly wilder environment than some of the traditional older boys are. And I've got to say, I'm 73, so I'm one of the older boys. But, you know, we all have to keep learning new skill sets, and, you know, we accommodate everybody.
It's very interesting what you said about the demographic as well. And you mentioned younger members. And are you finding that, because I've got this sort of theory that, you know, we have these wonderful schemes to get kids involved in fishing, which are fantastic. And I think that always sows the seed. And then what happens from there is that they may discover wine, amateur dramatics, whatever it is, and then come back to fishing perhaps when they've got a steadier income, and then can spend a little bit more time following that pursuit that they remember from when they were a little bit younger. Do you find that? Do you sort of have members in their 30s, 40s that are coming back into fishing and saying, actually, as you say, I'd like to try and catch some wild fish from moving water?
Yeah, you're quite right. And the demographic has shifted. What I'm saying isn't new. I mean, you know, the younger guys in their 30s and the 40s are still paying for kids and having jobs and careers. And, you know, modern technologies meant that people's careers fasten them down even more than it used to. So I've got a lot of guys who might be asset rich and time poor, and we've got guys who have retired early and are able to enjoy the fishing. So the young guys, they really treasure their days, and that's one of the things we have to do, is to facilitate what those guys can do and achieve in a day. I have to accommodate the more difficult access for the older guys, but the younger ones, and getting them in. This club is quite active in doing things with the local community, and there are two schools in the immediate area where we have a pond dipping day with them, and we facilitate them coming and learning about it. There's a school in Salisbury, for example, who are quite active, coming here and having a day on the river, and they offer to do litter picking. Not that we need it. So it's helping them discover what that dimple on the surface is, that helps to bring on the new members for the future. And it's you can't let people come poaching, but you can put areas aside like this club has, where kids in the village can go and fish, and they do fish with a piece of bread for a grayling or some wheat. You've got to facilitate that, otherwise they are not out. They're going to be our future members. They're not. That's our seed corn. And like most people in the fly fishing world, they arrived here by a means of coming through, you know, fishing, coarse fishing when they were younger, and pike fishing. And it's almost like an escalation from sitting with trying to catch carp, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I've tried fishing for carp with fly myself. From sitting there trying to catch carp, and, you know, you see the 8-year-old with a a size 12 hook and a lobworm and watching small perch coming to take his. These should all be facilitated and you should encourage them. And that's what we try and do without being too dogmatic about areas where they can't go and where they can go. And so the members, I think some of the members actually appreciate that we do have this wider responsibility and a wider interest in helping the community take part in some aspects of the river, its health, its denizens, and how we manage it.
I think that's a really, really good point and an interesting one. I was having this same conversation with a guide, Stefano, in Italy, and he was saying, he was talking as passionate as you are, Roger, about his river. And he was saying, people in the villages here, if you ask them what was in the river, they wouldn't have a clue. If you ask them what the food is that the fish eat, they'd probably think bread or salami or whatever it may be because they're throwing out there, and they don't have much of an idea. And if you are bringing them into your home water, I guess, and them getting a sense of really what's going on under that moving flow of the water, then they're invested in it. And if there are incidents or whatever there may be, then they're keeping a little bit closer eye on there. Have you found that you've sort of engaged people that way?
Yeah. What's been interesting is since we got Dave as the river keeper, he's integrated the community in the villages along the river. And what's become apparent is, although they might not have liked the fact he was asking them not to put dogs in the river at certain points, what's happened is they've become an appreciation that he contributes into the quality of their lives in a way that they didn't originally think. For instance, he's stopped fly tipping at 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning because he's been around. He's found people behaving suspiciously and approached them. By managing the watercourse, people who have houses along the river, they've suddenly realised that Dave's management is actually enhanced the value of their properties, and his diligence in watching for things happening in the water and what's happening on the flow of the water, in diverting it with deflectors and what have you, how it's maintained it, and there's not dry areas on the banking. So people have integrated into him. And so it was only about 3-4 weeks ago, there was a very nasty incident where there was 3 guys poaching on the river downstream from one of the bridges, and they were very aggressive. And this is before lunchtime on a Monday. And suddenly 3 people who were locals that were driving past stopped and started to phone the incident, see the incident, record it on their phones, and then one rang the police. And it was a system of where they recognised that Dave was a part of their fabric, not the guy that was stopping them putting their dogs in the river. And that appreciation has grown throughout the length of our 7 miles.
That is fantastic to hear. And you mentioning carp made me think, when I describe this club to people, progressive is the word that I think of. And for the reasons I've already said, that, the habitats primarily for the fish to flourish in, and the fishermen as a result enjoy the fishing and have to think about that fishing a little bit more. But, I think 25, 30 years ago, you could rock up here because there's some pike in the river and go catch pike on the fly as well.
Oh, is there anything as exciting as catching a pike on a fly? I mean, you stood there in the winter time, and members still do it here. They still thoroughly enjoy doing that in the winter, and trotting for grayling on certain areas. But the pike fly fishing, I mean, you've got this thing that resembles half a budgerigar, and you're drawing it through the water, and suddenly a pair of eyes and a snout appear, and it's 6 inches from the back of the fly, and it doesn't take it. And you've got mixed emotions. Half of you wants to pull it away from the pike because you have this instinct of saving it, and the other part is take it. Then it doesn't. So you try another couple of times and eventually take the pike. But we're not ripping pike out of the river. There's a place for pike in the ecology of a river. So the pike go back in. And we are at 99.9% catch and release of everything in this river. And that's another important development. It's not come under my aegis. That was done under Peter Hayes before me, and before that, presidents before that. And it's a voluntary thing that people have come into, of catch and release, more care in handling. Don't even take fish out of the water and knock them. Barbless hooks. That's been coming through the fly fishing world for 30, 40 years. And it's lovely to see that even now, there are members now saying in this very hot weather, should we be fishing? Because it stresses the fish. So there's a wide range of fish in the river. Downstream, we have dace. It's beautiful catching dace and seeing them in the river. We have chub. There's down at below the Reach 11A, we have huge pods of chub there that are 4 and 5 pounds. And it's lovely just to see them. They still have a place in the system. What I would say, I was a guest in 2019, and I went to a fishing club of quite a lot of respect and respectability, and people know it. And I had to reason to go around the back of the fishing hut at one point, and to my horror, I saw 9 grayling nailed to the back of the hut. And this was 2019. I took a photograph. Now, that astonished me. I felt as though I'd gone back 100 years. And they'd not been there long. They'd been there about a week. There was 10 or 12 pike skulls fastened to the uprights of the hut. But to discover the grayling was quite a shock. I've just been distracted now, because while I've just been talking to you, there's a weasel just gone across the path there and gone into the rushes. So he's gone for looking for his lunch.
Fantastic. And like I say, progressive is the term I'll always use to describe this club. And you'll see there's some of these, just exactly what you just described about, in 2019, killing grayling. Really? That stuff shouldn't, or pike, that is 20th century sort of stuff, 19th century sort of stuff, tapping grayling on the head. I've heard horrific stories in the past, and I still don't really get that, and that shouldn't be going on. But that shows leadership from yourself, from Peter, others, for this club, that those sort of practices haven't gone on, and it is a lot more enlightened, and I think there is massive kudos for that. So yes, big kudos for that. One of the other things I was thinking about the grayling as well was, I think social media, technology, everything else has allowed people to understand the value of them, not just in the ecosystem, but also from a fishing perspective, and a way, I guess, in more commercial fisheries to be able to extend their seasons as well. Have you found, and wrongly so, and I certainly don't include this club in it, but chalkstreams may be seen as slightly more sleepy in how their clubs are managed. Have you found that a challenge, and have you worked with technology to keep members in touch with what's going on the river?
Absolutely. I mean, I had to bring business skills into the club, which wasn't to everybody's taste. They liked things remaining as they were in 1950. But the first thing we had to do was, when I took over, we were struggling for members. Purely because people didn't know about us, and other people thought we were an exclusive club. So we had to break that perception. So the first thing we did was I designed the website and got that hosted, and brought some business expertise into managing the website so that it changes on a regular basis, so that spiders and crawlers can find us easily, so you don't disappear. Because so many people, businesses as well as fishing clubs, have just what you could call static A4 website. So that needed managing in a proactive way. At the same time, the problem, if you remember when you were a member here, you could meet people here that you'd never heard of, and there was no kind of social integration within the club. So I began a closed Facebook group. Some people had a lot of resilience to it, and I was surprised. Some members, actually their employers in the city, actually prohibited them ever going on Facebook. But we started this Facebook group, and now it's organic. the members now are communicating through it, putting pictures on. And the other thing I like about it, it's a working diary of the river. Dave, the river keeper, he posts on it once, twice, 3 times a week. So if anybody says what's happened to Reach 4 in the last 10 years, well, Dave's been here for 5 and it's documented, and you can go back through the photographs and go through the video footage and you can see how it's changed. And so we're leaving something for the future. So in 50 years' time, whatever Facebook has become or Meta has become by then, people can look at it and reflect on it, and even things like this interview. But we use the technology, and we use things like, credit and a shout out to Fergus, who did the London Fly Fishing Show for a couple of years. We were struggling for members. We took a stand there. I was there myself, and we just put some leaflets out and had some video footage. And that turned us around from having 5 or 6 member spaces into having a very, very healthy waiting list. At the moment, we've got about 10 or 12 on the waiting list. So that was another turnaround. So the integration of the membership now, and they meet up for fishing trips. They swap flies. We have the fly tying days. They have tips going backwards and forwards on books. The whole thing has come into a whole, and that has really made a big difference to the whole club. So I don't want to say I dragged the club into the 21st century, kicking and screaming. It was a willing step forward, and it was needed. And we integrated other things into it, because the perception we were very exclusive. That had to be broken. We've got members who are bricklayers. We've got members who are High Court judges. We've got members who are in the media, in high profile in the media. We've got retired high-ranking government officials and city guys. So we've now got this one great mass of different trades and backgrounds. And in particularly, the one thing that is most important is what they come here for as a unit is for the fishing. Who they are in their previous life, who they are in their background is absolutely irrelevant. People come here for fishing, and that's what the common denominator is.
That's really cool, and it is pretty special fishing. I think you're dead right shouting out the London show, and I know there's been murmurs that it may come back, and I remember you coming round saying you won't believe it, we've signed up more people, and then come around and signing up some more, and I hope we do see that one again. I know we're lucky enough to have BFFI, and I think Toby was almost on to something as well with the Bristol one, encompassing different forms of fishing, and it would be they're just a really cool way for people to catch up, and like Roger was saying, for barriers to be broken down. And I think it is easy, isn't it, for people to assume that chalkstream fishing is, and I hate the word, but a little bit exclusive. It's certainly not that, and this place certainly isn't that, and I've sat here with my friend Ray, who's the dude who I mention a lot on the podcast, and we'd be eating a Chinese at 6-7 o'clock at night waiting for the spinner fall and everything else, and I really loved every aspect of that. And yeah, I like that it's not exclusive and it's open for everybody, and certainly if you're living nearby as well. I think people, I used to travel a lot further, and even when I was in Devon as well, used to travel a fair way up to come and fish here, and I think that's testament to it. You mentioned Pete Hayes, who's been a guest on here with Don. We talked a number of years back about the book, and I know I've been up and done some fishing and casting days. I think that was one of the most nervous ones I've ever had. Just actually a few yards, the first one I did was a few yards from here, and I did everything and talked through casting, fishing techniques and everything else, and then asked yourself and Peter, is there anything else I should have covered? And I was thrilled when Peter said, nothing I can argue with there. So I was absolutely thrilled about that. But like you say, you're doing many things, aren't you, to get members together and help them enjoy the resource that little bit more? Well,
yes. Doing social events, and other clubs do social events, but I had to apply some kind of initiative to do something slightly different to hook the members. So, for instance, I fish with a cane rod and a silk line. So we have a cane rod and a silk line. We did that 10 years ago, because I used to run all the social events. We do an annual fly tying gossip, come and drop in whole day, come at any time, walk away. We do that kind of thing. We've had days of upstream nymphing. We've got one coming up very soon. You came here and did an excellent, you've done here you did 3 or 4 days. 3 days, I think, yeah. You did quite a few days here. And we've had other people come, and it's something we keep on going. The need to nymph isn't something that everybody wants to embrace. So we do keep having to improve skills. What is the difference between European nymphing and French nymphing and Polish? So it's a question of showing all these skills to the members and breaking down the barrier that it's got to be an exclusive dry fly. It doesn't. Can I just go back a second to something you said earlier? The perception of chalk streams being mown banks and stock fish. Well, I've got a number of people who come down here from northern rivers, because as you may have noticed, I'm northern. I've got a number of guests that come down, and they come down with an attitude of, oh, I'm going to take loads of fish out of here. And it comes as something as a shock to them when they realise just how they've got to change their skill set to accommodate this kind of fishing. They're not used to fish 40, 50 feet away, skedaddling up the river, because all they've done is scratch their heads. So I said, it brings a new skill set, and it's breaking down these barriers. I mean, I go back up and fish northern rivers. I fished the River Usk in April, and the River Usk is one that really, I love it. I love fishing the Usk, but it makes me aware of my encroaching years. It's a wading challenge. I mean, you don't get anything as benign as a chalk stream. So these regional perceptions of rivers and breaking down the barriers is a little bit of what the members are learning through embracing the technology and going in groups to do other things as well as just fish on the chalk stream.
I think that's a good point, and they are incredibly spooky. As I said, I was standing on a bridge watching a grayling, and he was obviously aware I was there and just sort of sat there for a bit and then just melted away. And I managed to get a photo of him. Whether it turns out okay or not, we'll see. The other thing is that this land runs through a lot of farming area. Does that prove for any challenges for you, or have you built relationships there too?
Well, under my presidency, I decided that the club needed a charm offensive with everybody along the river. And so I engage everybody, whether they're walking a dog, if it's a dad with his children hanging off a bridge, I always engage them in a conversation, because I want them to leave that exchange thinking, hey, they're not as bad, these people in the fishing club, as I had the thought that they may have been. I don't wear +4s and tweeds, and I think the very fact I've got flat vowels is half welcoming to them. But the landowner relations thing is getting more and more important, and this charm offensive, particularly because of COVID, has become more and more important, because one of the consequences that everybody knows about of COVID is there's a sense of right. People are suddenly saying, to hell with the consequences, I'm going to go and have a picnic and my kids are going to paddle in that river. So it's not a question of rocking up and saying, excuse me, do you mind getting your kids out the river, and you can't be here, it's private. You have to engage them and do an educational thing and explain to people what it is that's gone wrong. So just as a quick sideline of that, the local magazine here, they didn't realise the dangers of dogs and flea treatments and putting dogs. So the parish magazine recently published something on that. And the farmers along here, the farming, to some extent, what happens to farmers, and it's like fishing, they're not all the same. Some have a really easy time and some have a really difficult time. It's tough. And so we have to embrace what they want and try and, blend in and bend the knee to them occasionally. And that takes some education. There's been 1 or 2 farmers along the river where I've gone to see them, and I've done the northern thing of throwing my hat in first to see if it came back out before I step in the office. And so we have to help them and manage them, and to some extent they've now realised that we carry out a function, because they didn't know that people have been driving vehicles through the meadows at night, shooting hares or whatever, or coursing deer. So that they realise there's a value, and so we have to have this constant dialogue. And it's something I believe in very strongly. It's only if we don't have the constant dialogue, you'll be met with confrontation. But if they understand that you are a real person and you've got some similar interests and you're willing to help them, well, they approach you with requests before they just do what they want. And I think that's a really important issue that we've done right the way through the river. And we're still working on it. It's not perfect. So we still have to bend the knee to the people at certain areas close to the houses. And we'd put the odd sign up and say, please don't not let your dog in the water. But by the same token, we go into the local school and we do the pond dipping and show them things out the weed. So, and we give, things to the local community as well for the Oak Apple Day. So we have to take an active part to make the locals and the farming community realise their perception of chalkstream fly fishermen isn't public school boys as it might have been in the 30s and 40s. It's very difficult to get people to revisit a perception and upgrade that perception. And that happens to the fishing club as well. The farmers aren't like they were 30 years ago. That's got to change as well. So I think it's part of how we've got to be.
I think I've mentioned on the podcast before as well that I think one of the biggest disservices ever done to fly fishing was the J.R. Hartley advert, because everyone assumed everyone did wear tweeds and were genteel old men. And I was thinking the two of us sitting here, you're from Manchester, I'm from Essex. So that just shows how exclusive or not exclusive this club actually is. So, and I think you make some really interesting points here. And as I've alluded to there, that you're from Manchester, and that I guess has been a fascinating journey down to Wiltshire, where we are today. And where was it that fishing began for you, and where did fly fishing begin, and then did that sort of take over as your fishing career?
It's very interesting. Unlike many people, I didn't have a conventional start into fly fishing. Where I grew up in the middle of Manchester, I lived within a mile of the centre of Manchester, and I grew up with my grandmother. And my parents had problems with a disabled younger sibling. And so I grew up with my grandmother. And the only fishing I could ever see was men on mill lodges. I mean, I grew up where there was 32 factory chimneys within sight of my bedroom. And as a school in Cheetham Hill, we used to go on a bus ride to see trees and grass. The nature table was a piece of colt's foot or a squashed frog, something like that. So I used to watch men fishing after work on mill lodges. And the interesting thing with mill lodges is that they were used for cooling. And so where there was a warm water inflow back out the factory, even the winter, they never froze. And men used to fish. And there used to be tench and carp and rudd. And I used to watch these men doing it. And, the access into fly fishing was just non-existent. And it sounded, maybe you're too young, you are definitely too young, but 1963-64, Mr. Venables decided to launch a magazine called Creel. And I was a paper boy. I had 2 paper rounds, and people used to get this Creel magazine, 2 or 3 on my round. And I couldn't wait for Creel magazine coming out, because my only access to the countryside beyond that was the Archers. So I used to get this Creel magazine and read the articles as I was going round on my newspaper round. And I was fascinated with it. I think by that time, the odd day of truancy came in. And instead of crossing Manchester to go to the grammar school, as I was at that age, I might stay on the train or walk to catch another bus, and I'd end up in parts of Cheshire, and I'd watch somebody fly fishing. And it looked so graceful and elegant, and I couldn't understand. I could think, every time a fish comes up, he snatches it away. What's going on here? And then occasionally, I didn't see that. Where did that fish come from? And I was fascinated. What's he caught? How did he do that? And at the time, the access route for me was non-existent. I used to go to Farlow's in Pall Mall in Manchester, not the London shop, and it was right in the centre of Manchester, next door to the Manchester Evening News and Guardian, where my father worked as a printer. And so I used to go and stand and look at Farlow's window at tackle that was beyond my pocket, and I started to learn about it, and I found bits in the Angling Times and the Creel magazine. And eventually I pieced this together. And through my newspaper money and money from my gran, I eventually bought this solid glass rod, and a Milbro solid glass rod with a wooden centre pin. And I remember saving up for the fly line. It was £2. I think it was an airflow line. And going, and I didn't know which flies to use. And I'm ashamed to tell you, my first fly was a silver doctor. So I was trying to catch trout in a stream with a silver doctor. Guess what? I didn't catch any. But it forces you to go into it. And like the learning to fly, which I did later in my life, fly fishing forces you into disciplines and learning curves that you don't expect. And it's an ongoing, you never stop learning. So you start to learn the phases of life, of the fly life. You learn seasons of the fly life. You learn how the current moves, and it's a constant thinking process. You know, the micro surface currents, how you got to put it on the tree, which way is the wind coming from, the fish are not moving, changing the fly. And it leads you into, you can't be a fly fisherman, in my opinion, if you can't tie flies. So it leads you into that. So going from, realizing that when you buy flies, there's nothing that really suits the wild trout, that is the one that intrigues you, and so you end up thinking, well, I need one of those. And we all begin with the very basic materials of trying to tie a fly, and eventually you get some success, because when you are 15 to 17 years of age, you start to develop, and you eventually persist, as school holidays being what they are, and you get some success, and you build on that success, and you start to devour books that have been written over the years, and you go look at other people and you watch what they do. I mean, with you on this river some years ago, I was embarrassed. I was here and you were doing things with the members, and I'm thinking, I've never had a casting lesson in my life. I've managed it, but do I want people to see how I cast? But you learn and you developed it. So you learn everything from the type of line, the types of materials, the materials that float, the materials that sink. And I just think it's an ongoing learning curve that you never, ever satisfy.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right about that, and the tying and everything that goes with it that makes it part of it, the casting. It was fascinating you said you fish with bamboo as well, because actually I'm thinking the first time I fished here as a member, it was grayling time because it was late in the year, and I was fishing a Tom Moran rod, and my first fish was on a bamboo rod here. And I know a lot of listeners through the guests we've had, and I think there has been a change around that people are looking at, be it graphite rods, but it might also be glass and bamboo rods as well. What are you fishing bamboo-wise?
Well, I've got cane rods that have been made for me. I've got a 6'6", that's a 3-weight. I've got an 8-foot 4-weight. I've got an 8-foot 5-weight, an 8'6" 5-weight. And I don't go larger than that. But I decided, I think maybe it's an age thing. When I was about 50, I decided that I needed, because I was tying flies, I was working out that I wanted a rod that somebody put, a living piece of material, that somebody put that much care and love into it. So I decided and it revolutionised my casting. And then I decided I wanted a a silk line, and it led me into. There used to be a guy, I can't remember his name, in South Wales that used to make lovely silk lines, beautiful silk lines, and then I discovered the Terenzios from Italy, which I absolutely love, and I love his terminology for them as well. This is mouse coloured, that kind of thing. So I discovered, and I thought, hang on, I've now got the only man-made thing I've got. The only factory-made thing I've got is actually the tippet. Because I used a braided leader, so I'm using braided leaders and I tie my own fly. So I've got the hook and I've got the nylon, and suddenly I feel as though I've got more connectivity with something. And it kind of meets this, it satisfies this ethos of stalking a wild trout, catching a wild trout and releasing it without any stress or putting it under duress, unhooking it in the water. I mean, this club, for instance, we don't take fish out of the water and weigh them. This weighing thing is terrible. All our members give us a rough measurement in inches, and we apply the sturdy scale. The sturdy scale might not apply anymore, but the desire to keep the fish, the integrity of the fish, to us, and exposing it to as least risk as possible is very, very important. And I found that having had the cane rod days, more members went into this, and it's a growing thing. People are suddenly thinking it's great using a carbon fibre rod, but sometimes you just feel as though they want a greater touch with nature, and that's come. I think COVID has accelerated that. That's why we are seeing the issues we're seeing on rivers throughout the country.
I think that's a really, really good point. And I think also, I wonder if it is an age thing as well, that fishing becomes more about not just the fish, but the whole experience and how that becomes enhanced. And like you say, the connectivity that allows us to being there is enough, but also everything that goes with it. Have you found that?
Yeah, I mean, the buzzwords the last 5 to 10 years has been mental health. And, everybody's got their own issues, but I had a very, very difficult childhood. And when it came to doing O levels and A levels and the circumstances under which I was getting them, I think if I'd not had fishing, I would never have made it. I think fishing was a massive escape for me. And it's not just fly fishing, I did coarse fishing at the time. And I found that with people were really missing it during COVID. And I've got members who they live really difficult, stressful lives, and fishing is their escapism. And so we have to facilitate that, because these guys, as I said, are time poor, and they want to be left alone. And so they come here. So the mental health and the relaxation that fishing gives you, I think that's become more and more recognised. So, it's like tying flies in the winter. When sometimes it's the most reflective, it's almost a form of, okay, laugh at me if you wish, Zen Buddhism. But to sit at a vice quietly, whether you've got music on or a radio playing in the background or just silence, and tying a fly, and you transpose yourself into the place where that fly is going to be used and how it's going to present itself on the water. And is that tail too long or is it too short? And will that hackle need to be trimmed underneath? I mean, that is a form of escape and relief from the hurly-burly of everyday life. And that's an important aspect of fishing, which is why we embrace the wider community and understanding that there is a need for everybody to have some appreciation of the natural resources, and we can't be rigid, and we have to somehow integrate other people while we are paying for keeping this fishing as good as it is.
Yeah, really good points there. Tell me something. So you ended up on the chalkstreams, and I'm guessing you've travelled a little bit to fish too. But is it the case that the Wylye for you now, that there is no place like home?
Oh, there's no place like home. Do I want to go back fishing for roach and tench with a floating maggot chrysalis on the? That's how I came into it. When I saw fish take off the surface, I'd start off with that kind of thing. That's home originally for me. But everywhere you go fly fishing, you say it's about the wider thing. You don't have to catch fish for it to be a successful day. You can stand here on this riverbank, as you know, And I've stood many a time with water voles within touching distance of me. And if you stay rigid, if you're stalking a fish, the voles will come close. Or you stand next to a reed warbler's nest and you can see the young or the hen on the nest. So home waters, I love this river, and there's something about this river that inveigles it weaves its way into your psyche. It's wild, it's managed, and the old cliche is we are only custodians for somebody else. My home waters, I go back up north, I stand in I'm in teeming rain in a rain-fed river, and I'm watching the river rising. Is that my home? I don't know. Every so often, it's a form of masochism. I have to go and stand in the river loon to catch nothing, or catch small trout. And that's a very important thing about not home waters, but about fishing. There's a blog around years ago, I don't know if it's still around. It was called How Small a Trout. And how small a trout, the fact you catch a trout is the gift. It's not whether you catch a big one or how many big ones you've caught. It's the fact that you've actually caught the trout. That is, you'd be satisfied if it's 6 inches or 8 inches. You've done well on that day. And so going back to my home waters, yeah, I go back up north occasionally, but I've go to Granton-on-Spey and I'm suddenly feeling I could live here. I could be ever. I go to the Derbyshire Wye. Why am I not living here? I come down here and I watch the barn owls, and there was 5 over that field earlier this year, three young ones with parents, and I watched the mist rising slowly off the fields, and I'm thinking, this is where I need to be. Why would I want to be anywhere else? And so home, and I think you must be part of the same group. I think fly fishermen, you don't say, I've had enough of golf, I think I'll take up fly fishing. It's in your blood. And you've got to be the type of person that would stare into a pond or stare into a puddle or, stare into a small stream. And you what was that darting thing I just saw then? What was that? It might only have been a stickleback or a minnow. It might be a shoaler minnow, but you watch them. So home is where there's a piece of moving water and there's something moving and hiding in the weeds and under the banking. That's home.
That's perfect. I don't think I could have put that better. And it's funny you say about this, I was looking over into the river today thinking, yeah, I could live here. It is just absolutely fantastic. Roger, it's been so great to catch up with you, as it always is. Your positivity, what you've done for the club, I can't emphasize enough, and I can see your hand wherever I walk along here so far. It's been wonderful to see. If people are, you say you've got a little bit of a waiting list for the club, and you mentioned the website. How can people, because I'm doing my best to sort of describe it as you have done so eloquently, but if people want to have a look at the website, how can people find the Wilton Fly Fishing Club website?
Well, search Wilton Fly Fishing Club on the web. It comes up with wffc.com. WiltonFFC.com. We're there. Get in contact with our onsec, Mike Tebbs. My email's on there as well. Ask around and you'll find it. And we invite people to come. We don't just say, yes, here it is, give us your money, come. We have to explain to people it isn't that easy. It's wild trout, but come and have a look. And we've got members who came from stock fishing and they struggle and they've waited. But by all means, come, have a talk. Come and meet us and see what kind of people we are. And we're very welcoming to all kinds.
I can only echo that. And like I said at the very beginning, chalk streams often get a bad rap and are manicured for the angler. This is a little bit different. If you're looking for something a little bit more challenging, if you're looking to wade in a beautiful chalk stream, if you're looking to catch wild fish, well, I think you should give this a look. And I'm a little bit biased because I have been a member of the club and I do love it here, and yeah, I'm going to ask Roger very, very nicely if I can have a little bit of a fish after this. But it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Roger.
On behalf of the fishing club, it's been a pleasure meeting you again with you, Pete. All right.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this edition of the Fly Culture Podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. As ever, and with all of these, that these are free to download. There are no hidden charges with this. We just love talking about fishing. So, as ever, there will be plenty more, but thanks so much for listening.
The Fly Culture Podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly print magazine. For more information, please visit flyculturemag.com. You can also find Fly Culture on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter.